Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. On the paper boats, elders wearing tattered black robes sat under the lanterns, sailing the boats into the fog. Imposing shapes that looked like gods and devils could be faintly seen in the fog, fighting with those elders in the boats. Ghostly light would shine in the two worlds from time to time, but what was peculiar was that the shockwaves from the two worlds had never reached this world. The shockwaves didn't affect great ruins and didn't have any impact on reality. Those are messengers of death from the legends. Yang Jingjing was astonished. Yudu's messengers of death started to fight with Fengdu? What was going on? She couldn't bother to think much more. Sunship continued forward with rumbles, rushing towards God-broken mountain range. It got closer and closer to the battle of Fengdu and Yudu. Meanwhile, the battlefield above was one of village chief, eternal peace Imperial preceptor, and the gods of high heavens. It was also extremely intense, but it was still much inferior when compared to the battle of Fengdu and Yudu. Everyone in the battle above the mountains was extremely powerful, and they were all equivalent to gods and devils, possessing remarkable abilities. Yet none of them had any idea that another battle was happening right beneath their feet, which was of an even larger scale and much more shocking. Sunship sailed to the bottom of God-broken mountain range, but it was yet to get close when Yang Jingjing suddenly felt an ineffable palpitation. Balls of will-o'-the-wisp floated over from the darkness and paper boats swarmed toward Fengdu world. Within them, all of the messengers of death seemed to look exactly the same. They were cold, silent, and examining them in detail with unseen faces. They were covered by a layer of fog which hid their true appearances. When looking at them, a person would only have a feeling that they had the most ordinary faces. Countless paper boats shuttled forth like sharp arrows, while behind them Yang Jingjing saw an extremely terrifying sight. It was a pair of flaming bull's horns slowly rising from the darkness. They were so huge that what formed them were pieces of land from destroyed worlds. Countless souls shrieked miserably and struggled, continuously falling off from the nine-bend bull horns. Earth count? Yang Jingjing was extremely nervous. She clearly knew that the battle between the two worlds would be extremely dangerous, but the crucial point had been reached, so she had no choice but to brace herself and push Sunship to rush toward God-broken mountain range. BA2, Psi BA2. Rumblings came from the darkness, and the sound seemed to be locked in the area. The strong practitioners that were fighting fiercely on the mountain didn't hear or detect any abnormalities. They could only see Sunship closing in. Meanwhile, Sunship and Fengdu world brushed past each other. Yang Jingjing on the ship heard the cryptic Yudu language, but she didn't understand the meaning of the words. In Fengdu, the clothes of King Yama, who was under the Cape of Darkness, fluttered. It swept around Fengdu City, and the gods of all sizes looked tiny standing under it. In the sea of fog, the paper men and paper horses were fighting with the gods and devils. The elders stood up and raised their lanterns. The light shone, and the skeletons that came rushing at them fell in waves, turning into black smoke. King Yama raised his hand, and the whole of Fengdu seemed to stop. Everything seemed to become fixed in place, including time. King Yama raised his hand, and a divine sword appeared, slashing towards the bull's horn of the other world. Wherever the black sword swept past, space was compressed into substance, causing layers of space to crumble. Yang Jingjing's scalp crawled, but she couldn't care much more. She used all the power of Sunship to rush towards God-broken mountain range. Half of Sunship's body had already entered Fengdu and Yudu, making it extremely difficult for her to advance. But suddenly, she broke free of the restraint from the two worlds and escaped. Yang Jingjing let out a sigh of relief and turned back to take a look once more. She then saw that Fengdu and Yudu, the two peculiar worlds, had disappeared. She could no longer see the sight of them fighting. Truly weird. On God-broken mountain range, village chief and the rest were fighting with the gods of high heavens. The imposing gods all had 4 heads and 8 arms, or 3 heads and 6 arms, their whole bodies seeming to have been forged from gold. All kinds of treasures burst forth with boundless power, crumbling the heaven and rending the earth. Everyone sank into a fierce battle, which was extremely exhausting for the old sword god who was covered in injuries. Everyone's chi and blood were vigorous and surged into the sky with bloodlight, dyeing half of the sky red. Bang! A huge figure came crashing down from the air and landed in front of Sunship. It was Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's primordial spirit which had been sent down. Even if he was the saint that was said to appear only once every 500 years, he was still in a severely disadvantageous situation against absolute power. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor rose into the sky and his sword light filled the heaven. His sword skill transformed unpredictably as he slashed toward a god with only one eye. That god opened his eye and boundless divine light burst forth, flooding Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. Clank, clank, clank. The sound of swords hitting each other rang out continuously as Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's sword light swirled and broke through the divine light of the eye, stabbing it and coming out on the other side of the head. However, the next instant, the one-eyed god's fist landed on Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body. It squashed him and smashed him against a mountain peak, leveling it to the ground. The head of the one-eyed god split open, and a huge eye tunneled out. Another fist then rose and smashed ruthlessly against Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. So sinister. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor coughed up blood and raised his head to look at the fist coming for him. The head of the one-eyed god actually twisted around, and he looked at him scornfully. However, I'm not bad as well, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor smiled. First chapter of Sword World, Boundary. That one-eyed god was slightly stunned. The sword light hidden in his head suddenly exploded. Sword World was the sword skill founded by Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor after he had entered the realm of Sword Path with Village Chief's guidance. It was different from his previous sword skills, for in the past, he had only come to the gate of Sword Path. He hadn't yet entered the Sword Path. Even if his sword skills had been strong then and he was known as Sword God who had founded the 3 basic sword forms, without entering the Sword Path, he could never be on par with Village Chief. But after he entered the Sword Path, his battle power rose by a lot. He had unmatched talent and his abilities had no shortcomings. The Sword Path he had comprehended was different from that of the person he admired. Village Chief commemorated the martyrs and founded Sword Picture, which cherished the memories of the path. Imperial Preceptor, on the other hand, was opening up new horizons and pushing ahead with his reform, possessing a great spirit and broad mind. That latter one determined his achievements. Village Chief's generation was already gone while he was just starting with his. His sword world had just been founded, so only the first chapter was finished, and it was Boundary. It set the boundaries for the mountains and rivers, for the Empire, quelled the chaos in the 4 seas, swept the disasters in the 6 directions and 8 wildernesses, starting a world of peace and prosperity. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's will and ambition were hidden within his sword, and it was the most supreme sword skill he could found at that moment in time. When the one-eyed god was stabbed in the eye by his sword, Boundary was actually hidden inside his head. The one-eyed god had been scheming, for he didn't only have one eye. He had 2, but since his techniques were special, he had extraordinary attainments on the path of creation. With the mysterious creation, he shifted one of his eyes to the center of his brows. In the meantime, the other eye was shifted to the back of his head. It was usually covered by his hair, so people would think he only had one eye. No one knew he could see things in front and behind. He knew Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was a formidable opponent and was also the main person in charge of Eternal Peace Empire's reform, thus even if he had to sacrifice an eye, he wanted to send him on his way. Even though he was a sly old fox and sacrificed an eye, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was a level higher than him in mind games. Boundary, which was hidden in the wound, exploded, and cracks appeared on the head of the one-eyed god. Lines of snow-white sword light spilled out from those cracks. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose suddenly became snow-white in color, then sword lights came pouring out of his facial orifices. More and more cracks spread through his head and more sword lights came shining out from within them. In a split second, the snow-white rays lighted up the snowy mountains as though it was daytime. Thump! The fist of the one-eyed god landed heavily onto Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body, and the ground instantly fissured. Cracks stretched in all directions, their distance too great to be counted. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor vomited blood as he heard the sound of his bones snapping. Everything from the one-eyed god's neck upwards had completely vanished. His corpse swayed before collapsing onto the floor. In the pit below, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor couldn't move at all. With his lingering breath, he pleaded, "Jade Face Poison King, save me." At that moment, Cripple was sprinting with Apothecary on his back, escaping frantically from the rings of battle. Apothecary was refining medicine without stop, at a speed that was much faster than that of Qin Mu. He constantly threw poison at the gods of high heavens and medicines at village chief and the rest of his cohort. "Cripple, faster, faster! Go faster! Didn't you brag that your speed is the first in this world? If I didn't carry you, I would be the first in the world." Cripple was flustered and exasperated. "If you have the ability, why don't you try getting your legs chopped off and reattached?" "Twice, my legs got chopped off twice. They were just reattached again, so I'm afraid if I run any faster, they will leave my upper body, abandoning me to run away by themselves." "It's fine. Mua's craft is very good, they won't break so easily." "Run faster, the god behind us is almost catching up," Apothecary said in consolation. Behind them, three-headed god was running in a frenzy. Apothecary had long released the little babies he had raised, and numerous venomous creatures pounced frantically toward the god like a flood. The venomous creatures had been raised by Apothecary using spirit pills, miraculous medicines, and all kinds of poisons for many years. All of their abilities were strong, and they transformed as they ran. In just a few moments, their bodies expanded, causing their muscles and bones to bulge outward, turning them into fiendish behemoths that could swallow clouds and spit fog along with fire, water, and poison. Even so, they could only slow the three-headed god. He was extremely terrifying, smashing the venomous creatures into smithereens, turning them into lumps of colorful bug juice as their broken limbs flew in all directions. They were blown away by his roar before they could even get close. Even if he got poisoned, one of the three heads would blaze furiously, alighting in flames. The god would burn from inside out, using divine fire to temper his body. The divine fire would flow through his body over and over again, incinerating the venom. His other head in the meantime would turn sapphire blue. The rays of light from it would cleanse his body over and over again, discharging the toxin from his body instantly. Apothecary's poison could be said to have met its nemesis. Furthermore, without the venomous creatures, Apothecary's personal abilities could be said to be the weakest in the village. He was merely on celestial being realm as all his time was spent on poison and his venomous creatures. If one took his poison and venomous creatures into consideration, his battle power was impossible to judge. He could poison a god to death, but would also die from a slap. When Cripple had to carry someone, his speed was inferior to that of his peak. He also had to avoid the possible sneak attacks from the other gods, so their situation was made even worse. Even with Cripple's unmatched speed, it was extremely dangerous to travel through all the world-shaking divine arts. Any carelessness would result in both of their deaths. Imperial Preceptor has lost his power to fight. We need to save him first. Cripple carried Apothecary to where Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had fallen. Yet at that moment, the three-headed god suddenly shook his body, and two heads flew across the sky, sweeping toward them with fire and water. Cripple hurriedly avoided the attacks, but the land in front of him suddenly became incomparably hot, turning into boiling lava instantly. The entire snow mountain sank continuously while a god stood on it with a clear mirror in his hand. The mirror floated up and hung in the sky, shining toward the lava with its wide surface. The underground seemed to become a clear lake that could hide nothing. That god had a goat's head with a pair of curved goat horns. His gaze was sharp as he scanned the underground. Suddenly, the mirror light shone onto Tuxing foam. He was running through the ground, but when he was caught by the mirror's light, his body instantly slowed. He had been traveling freely underground, but the mirror light could actually restrain him, limiting his speed. Die? The goat-headed god sneered, and the horns on his head left it to rush into the lava, aiming straight for Tuxing foam. At that moment, the lava suddenly rose up to form a huge face. It opened its mouth to swallow the goat-headed god. I'll drag you down even if I die. Cripple and Apothecary looked underground and saw Tuxing Feng fixed in place by the shine of the clear mirror. The two horns had stabbed into him from the front and the back. Tuxing Feng's divine art sank the goat-headed god into the ground, bringing him to the depths of the earth. Cripple, steal that mirror! Apothecary shouted in a hurry. Cripple sprinted over and executed heaven-pilfering sun-switching hands. The clear mirror vanished without a trace, hidden away by him. Tuxing Feng, who was underground, immediately could move and attack the goat-headed god with all his strength. Yet without the mirror's light, Cripple and Apothecary couldn't see the situation underground. Lava boiled and emanated with heat waves. Suddenly, it rose into the air and formed a huge palm which rapidly solidified. What followed after it was palms, fists, hammers, and legs bursting out from the lava. They were all fixed in the sky, shaken to the core. Cripple hid behind Apothecary to avoid damage while shouting into the ground. 3-inch nail, stop fighting and come out quickly. Let Apothecary treat your injuries. Apothecary gently patted his shoulders and said in a low voice, no need to call him out. Let him fight to his heart's content. When he was fixed in place earlier, the goat horns had nailed his primordial spirit. He's only left with his last breath now. Once it finishes, he will. He didn't continue. Cripple was stunned for a moment, then gritted his teeth and sprinted to where Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had fallen without looking back. The sea of lava was still trembling non-stop, and all kinds of weird rocks rose from the ground. The desperate battle below was beyond what one could imagine. But suddenly, it calmed down. What was left was the strange rocks from the sea and the shapes of all kinds of palms and fists. Whoosh! The lava split into two, and the goat-headed god slowly walked out, his body growing taller and taller. Thump, thump, thump. He walked out of the sea of lava, and it flowed down his body, turning into pitch-black rock when it landed on the ground. His eyes were blank and he looked extremely miserable. However, he was still full of astonishing fighting spirit. Cripple and Apothecary were shocked. Yet at that moment, the goat-headed god collapsed onto the ground, a sharp horned hammer lodged in the back of his head. Tuxing Feng's short body fell while holding onto his hammer, the two goats' horns still stuck in his body. The scarlet fire in the eyes of the chief of Earth travelers was slowly dimming. The taste of flaming fruit of the underground is just like that of strong wine. When it flows down your mouth, your throat allows you to relive your life again. The scarlet fire in his eyes gradually went out as he muttered, I feel that taste again, so I guess my life is coming to an end. I shouldn't have answered the summons of human Emperor's seal, but our ancestor made an oath, and Earth travelers will never defy the oath of their ancestor. He closed his eyes and sank into the lava with the goat-headed god. They were both slowly swallowed by it. Cripple carried Apothecary to Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's side. Apothecary was doing emergency treatment when incomparably bright light burst forth from the darkness. They raised their heads and saw Sunship sailing in. A heavenly godlike figure was standing on the ship with her hands holding onto chains, guiding a sun over. It's the girl that Mu had brought over. She's Sun Guardian. Apothecary immediately recognized Yang Jingjing and couldn't help being astonished. Sun Guardian, come and help, quickly. Yang Jingjing shifted her gaze down and her arms pulled on the chains. The sun high up in the sky was immediately affected by the brute force coming down from the sky. On Sunship, the expressions of the tens of thousands of sun herders changed drastically. All of them shouted in unison, Sun Guardian, no. Little ancestor, you can't learn from His Highness, Sun Herd Chief shouted out. The sun faltered halfway, freezing in place. From below it, rays of extremely sharp golden light shot toward the gods of high heavens. The battlefield stretched for several hundred miles and was separated into a few areas, however, all of them were along the line of God-broken mountain range. The 5 immortals of the demon race, King Kuan, Queen Yi, Blind, Old Ma, Butcher, Mute, Deaf, Imperial Preceptor, Village Chief, Granny Sai, Old Dao Master, Old Rulai, and Hermit Qin Yu were all engaged in their own battles. Since they were the strongest of their respective races, it was rare for them to meet a worthy match. However, when compared to the gods of high heavens, they were still a level lower. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Tuxing Phone were already top-notch practitioners. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had struggled with all he had to kill the one-eyed god, yet he still suffered heavy injuries while Tuxing Phone's battle ended in mutual destruction. This showed the gap between their abilities. The abilities of the five immortals and Granny Sai were slightly inferior, but they had many tricks, so they relied on wandering around and fighting with divine arts. The opponent's abilities were too strong, however, tiring them out. Yang Jingjing had come at just the right time. When the son of Sunship landed, Yellow Immortal opened up the sack on his back. Yellow smoke which stank spewed out from inside, sickening his opponent until his liver and guts felt like they'd been cut to pieces, making him vomit badly. Yellow Immortal went forward to suck his souls and spirits, but he was pushed down by his opponent. Elsewhere, Willow Immortal showed her true form of a huge green snake which was like a green dragon coiled around the top of a snowy mountain. Her opponent then also revealed his true form. He was the height of a mountain, covered in white fur, and with a gaze like sparks in the darkness. Willow Immortal vomited blood from the beating she received after, the blood flowing non-stop from her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. White Immortal, Rat Immortal, and Fox Immortal suffered from injuries as well. Granny Sai was the only one who could still hold on with teleportation flag and great overarching heavenly star palm force, avoiding the attacks from her opponent. The five immortals would usually choose to work together to fight against one enemy, but due to a lack of manpower, they had to drag two gods back, and it was very exhausting for them. With Granny Sai, the pressure was lessened a bit, but it still wasn't enough for them to contend with two gods. On the other side, Old Dao Master's Dao Sword had already executed to the 14th writing. He had only cultivated half a move of the 14th writing which he used to contend against his opponents, splitting the mountains and cracking the earth. However, the flaw in his move was soon caught by his opponent. A trail of divine light shot through the layers of sword lights, nailing Old Dao Master to the cliff. Dao Sword is only SOSO. The god's huge palm smashed toward Dao Master who was on the cliff. Old Rulai executed all 20 heavens in his Rulai's Mahayana Sutra, and his body became like a huge Buddha. 10,000 Buddhas surrounded him, and he clashed with his opponent with brute force. However, he also landed in a disadvantageous situation, and his 20 heavens went to ruin. The three-headed and six-armed god that he was fighting was next to him, trading fist for fist. Soon, Old Rulai was covered in bloody splotches which dyed his white eyebrows red. He was already old and his chi and blood weren't as vigorous as they had been before. His constitution wasn't as good either. If it was in the past, with the power of Rulai's Mahayana Sutra, he could have continued fighting without tiring out. His vigorous chi and blood could increase the power of his divine arts by leaps and bounds. But he was less capable now, ending up suppressed by his opponent. From nearby, Old Ma had wanted to come forth and rescue him several times, but he was always hindered by his opponent, which prevented him from giving aid. His situation was almost the same, since he had also cultivated to the last realm of Rulai's Mahayana Sutra, the Brahma realm. Gods and Buddhas surrounded him with 20 layers of precious images. Old Ma's strength lay in his youth, his body was strong and sturdy, while Old Rulai's chi and blood had withered so he couldn't last for a long time. Sharaputra, form does not differ from emptiness, emptiness does not differ from form. Chantings came from Old Rulai's mouth, and his chi and blood suddenly became vigorous. The power of his moves became more and more terrifying, surpassing those of his opponent. Old Ma's heart trembled and he shouted, "Master!" Old Rulai turned back to look at him and smiled. "Buddhism is left to you, pass it down for me." The same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. The Buddha light shone brightly, drowning out Old Rulai and his opponent. Unlike them, Blind flew around between all the battlefields, using his divine mind eyes to break through the enemy's flaws and land sneak attacks. However, he could only make the gods defend and save the lives of his people, not land any critical hits. Butcher and his opponent, Star Sovereign Yang, could be said to be crazy. They were fighting with all they had. Once they drew their knives, there was no one else for them. One person, one knife. No matter how heavy their injuries were, no matter how strong the opponent's attacks became, they just wielded their knives to slash forward. The great furnace on Mute's back overflowed with divine flames, and the silver pellets in the chest flowed out, changing without end, evolving into all kinds of divine weapons. There seemed to be a great furnace with boundless energy in his dantian, and with the two furnaces blazing, he possessed unmatched strength. Def painted with ink, and it dyed the heaven and earth. He painted on the snow mountains and land, allowing his paintings to overlap with reality. They were hidden in the mountains and rivers which overlapped with his paintings, presenting a strange and elegant world. He brought his opponent to travel between reality and his painting, yet he didn't fight with him. He was definitely not his match in a head-on collision. Right at that moment, his brush painted 100 miles of mountains and rivers. There was a painting in a painting, a world in a world. It confused his opponent, stealing away their sense of direction and making them unable to find their way out. Def jumped out of the painting into the world, thinking of destroying the mountains and rivers along with the world in the painting. But suddenly, a sword light flew out from the painting and pierced his chest. Def was blown backward and used all his might to execute his brush. With a strong stroke, all the mountains in the area of 100 miles crumbled one after another, disappearing inwards and exploding with extremely terrifying energy. A mere mortal shouldn't possess the power of gods and devils. Angry roars came from the explosion of the crumbling world, and a blooded palm stretched out, grabbing for Def, who was flying backward. Queen Yi and King Kuan had revealed their true forms and were traveling back and forth through the sea and sky. They were like two indomitable beast gods whose roars were deafening to the ears. Huge beasts and gods waged a battle against each other, splitting the heaven and rending the earth. Dark clouds concealed the moon, but they were split from time to time. Only then would moonlight shine down. King Kuan and Queen Yi were covered in injuries, but their fighting spirits were still overflowing. Queen Yi was in the form of a huge bird, flapping her wings to travel over the sea. Wherever she passed, the sea would be churned up, and whenever she spun rapidly, she would unleash her knife, splitting the air with it and slashing at the god-suppressing King Kuan. Her knife sliced open the sky, but fell down wasn't moonlight. Instead, a sun fell out from the slit she had sliced open. Queen Yi didn't know what had happened. However, since her knife was already out, it was difficult to pull it back. She could only use all her might to slash at the god-suppressing King Kuan. At that moment, the dark cloud split apart again, and another god popped out with a malicious face. His hand rose in Queen Yi's direction, and his 5 fingers were like mountains as they came for her. The god hidden in the cloud then noticed the falling sun and was slightly stunned. It puzzled him. What's this divine art? At that moment, the sun burst forth, and from under it, rays of extremely sharp golden light rained on him. Not only him, the other gods of high heavens also suffered from the attack. The golden rays were incomparably sharp and pierced straight through the bodies of all the gods. Yang Jingjing wasn't violent like Qin Mu. He had raised the son of Sunship to use it to smash the opponent with astonishing destructive power, but it was a method which would easily damage the sun. The main reason why he did it though was because he didn't know how to control it, how to unleash its power, but as the Sun Guardian, Yang Jingjing had controlled Sunship many times in battle in the darkness, so she knew everything about the usage of Sunship and the sun, so she could control them freely. Under her hand, Sunship could unleash the greatest power with the most minimal damage to the sun. At that instant, thousands of miles around God-broken mountain range were lighted up. King Kuan in the sea used his golden horn to pierce the lower body of a god that was stepping on him, nailing him to the sea surface. That god didn't have the time to avoid and shattered under the sunlight. The hand that grabbed towards Def broke under the shine, and the palm which was about to slap old down master was also pierced by the rays. Under the sunlight, the face of the god was lit up. Buddha rays were intense, but even they were driven away by the sunlight, revealing 2 figures that were standing straight within them. Old Rulai had taken the god down with him. The rays continued to shine from the sun, lighting up the majestic snowy mountains. The one on which Willow Immortal stood was dyed red. The huge snake that was like a green dragon fell from the mountain while Yellow Immortal's sack was pierced with holes. Its owner, who was under the god's leg, was crushed into pulp while that god was covered with White Immortal's silver needles, looking like a huge porcupine. The sunlight continued to shine into the distance, lighting up all the battlefield. Butcher and Star Sovereign Yang's body were lighted up in midair while Hermit Qin Mu and Flower Sovereign's bodies were stretched out as they fell down. The rays of the sun shone into an even further distance, and the ninth move of sword picture could be seen. Star Sovereign Xiao and another god was being drowned out by it. Below Sunship, the two heads of the three-headed god had just heavily injured Cripple and Apothecary. The two of them were blown high up. At that moment, a heavenly silkworm flew out from Apothecary's body, spitting silk with all its might to wrap Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor up, preventing him from dying from his injuries. Boom! Sunship trembled violently, and the three-headed god recalled his two heads before landing on the ship. He rushed toward Yang Jingjing, who was in the center of the four pillars. The face of Sun Herd Chief and the rest changed drastically as they tried to stop him. Countless Sun Herders were blasted into smithereens, yet they still couldn't even slow him down. The appearance of Sunship had a huge impact on the battlefield, so if Yang Jingjing was left to continue her attacks, the gods of high heavens might just suffer an utter defeat. Yang Jingjing controlled the ancient divine weapon called Sunship, whose power was fierce, strong enough to threaten everyone. However, because she was controlling it, her movement was limited, and it brought great danger to her. If anyone closed it on her, it was extremely unfavorable for her. When Sunship came out, the three-headed god had been chasing after Cripple and Apothecary, who were in the surroundings. He was the closest to Sunship, but no one had expected him to just jump to the ship, abandoning his original targets. Sun-Herder Chief raised his sun bell and rang it loud, but he still found it difficult to block the opponent's attack. By then, the god had already come near the divine pillars. Two heads flew out once again and passed by Sun-Herder Chief to attack the god's real target. One head spewed out a jet of water while the other blazing fire toward Yang Jingjing. She vomited blood as she stretched out her hand to defend. The power of the sun was then instantly decreased. Meanwhile, on the other side, the power of the ninth move of sword picture was completely unleashed. The dazzling sword lights lit up the world, overshadowing the rays of the sun. But they dimmed soon. Where they had originated, Star Sovereign stood straight. He stared coldly at the other side where stood his old foe, the human emperor. "You old." Star Sovereign Xiao looked at him with scorn as a crack spread on the heart of his brows. "If you were during your peak, I would have definitely died from this move. But now, your chi and blood are almost exhausted. This move actually couldn't take my life, it's just..." His body swayed while blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled and said, "You still destroyed my life force, though. But I ain't bad as well, at least I can drag you down with me." The god fighting by his side against the old sword god suddenly split into pieces, turning into chunks of flesh that fell to the ground. This video will end here.